Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're talking about build-a-wall politics after Donald Trump's his visit to Mexico City, where he smoothed things over with Mexico's president, and then a fiery speech on immigration in Arizona. We're doing it in the company of International New York Times columnist Celestine Boland from Mexico City. John Ackerman, academic columnist and editor-in-chief of the Mexican Law Review. From Brussels, Bruno Gollnisch, member of the European Parliament for France's National Front Party of Marine Le Pen. And Yascha Mounk, fellow at the Transatlantic Academy, who teaches at Harvard University. Yascha, just before the break, we saw, I mean, it's a bit of a blurring of the lines, isn't it, when it comes to who likes and doesn't like Donald Trump and on what grounds. What are the political fault lines that matter these days?
I think what we're seeing in this debate is absolutely fascinating, François. The way in which John Ackerman representing the kind of as he would say, neoliberal global left on the one hand, and Bruno Gollnisch representing the Front National on the other end, end up agreeing on everything. They end up agreeing on Russia, they end up agreeing on Trump, they end up agreeing that there's not really any difference between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. It's fascinating. Les extrêmes se touchent, as we say in France. The extremes touch. If you are not able to recognize the distinction between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, if you're not able to see that however many flaws are in the current system and however much the current system needs to be reformed, I think I would like to finish what I'm saying right now. Thank you very much. If you're not willing to see those distinctions, then I think there's something very, very interesting going on. We need to do two things. As people who believe in liberal democracy, as two people in this debate seem not to, we need to do two things. We need to actually proactively and proudly defend liberal principles, but we also need to recognize that we need real reform in order to make those principles sustainable. But over the last 20 or 30 years, most average people have not had an improvement in their standard of living, and that we need real economic reform to make sure they do. But of course, there have been certain mistakes of foreign policy in the last 20, 30 years. But something like the Iraq War was a big mistake where we have to actually enforce liberal international norms. But the way to do that is not to think that we'll make a temporary alliance between far left and far right, destroy the system as we have it, have a sort of secret sympathy for Putin and for Trump, because at least they're destroying the system, and then see what comes next. That's deeply irresponsible and quite scary, actually.
Which system?
John Ackerman.
Which system are you talking about?
That was certainly a ideologically charged statement there. This shows the incredible self-satisfaction of this neoliberal global ideology, which feels the world is escaping from them and has no response to this. Donald Trump and Enrique Pena Nieto are absolute brain children, poster children of the disaster of neoliberal and so-called liberal democracy. Enrique Pena Nieto, when he came in 4 years ago, was bragged about through the whole world, turned into the great leader of a supposed liberal democracy by the Financial Times, by New York Times, all of the international press. And look how he's turned out to be the best buddy of Donald Trump. Donald Trump's wealth and incredible concentration of economic and political power is directly the result of the concentration of wealth and power, which has been the result of so-called liberal democracy and neoliberalism over the last 4 or 5 decades. So the ones that are really touching each other are Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. They are, from our perspective in Latin America, of course, on the same side of the ball.
How do you explain that both John, how do you explain that both Donald Trump and you heard Bruno Gollnisch there, the Front National in France, have a soft spot for Vladimir Putin?
Trump and Putin, I don't know about their relationship. I mean, Russia, I definitely detect a real sort of Russia phobia, of course, within the United States and Europe. That's a completely different issue. What we have going on here, it's very interesting, actually, from a Mexican point of view. Mexico plays a very similar role to Ukraine in some ways. You know, I mean, the United States is grabbing at Mexico, trying to separate it from Latin America and incorporate into this sort of North American national security, oil self-sustainability region. That's why Mexico has now started to build a wall itself with Guatemala on orders from Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. You know, I don't see a whole lot of difference between what's going on in the different superpowers. Each one is struggling from their side, and this idea that somehow there's these sort of still liberal, clean principles directing Clinton and Obama, that's just a fantasy we need to throw out on the table.
Celestine Bolen?
I mean, I just think that, if we try to sort of pull these themes together, what Yasha was saying about the system needs fixing, I mean, I think that Trump is a reflection of that the system isn't really, there are a lot of people in the United States who feel that they're not represented. They're very frustrated with their economic situation. They're frustrated with immigration. And, in many ways, the traditional parties, like the traditional parties here in France, have not always put their ear to the ground and listened to what people were saying.
And despite stories about fired campaign managers, prominent Republicans endorsing Hillary, pollster Nate Silver on his 538 blog sees her lead tightening to 4 or 5 percentage points, with Fox News putting the margin at 2%. She's still ahead in nearly all the key swing states, but the race is far from over. Could Trump win?
I mean, a week ago I thought not. Perhaps now I should consider it. It's it's a political race. I mean, here in France too, it would be foolish to try to kind of predict, who's going to come out ahead. I think in the United States, for electoral college reasons, she still has a lead if you look at the swing states. But I think that this issue of people being fed up, people being sort of ready to kind of take it out on the establishment, going for a man who shoots his mouth off, that sounds good in a world where so much has been scripted, or, I don't know about neoliberal, but just basically a kind of professional politicians have, don't always, they sound very sincere. So I'm not sure Trump is either, but, he gets people listening. And I think that's true elsewhere. I think that kind of populist, I think Brexit in the UK had a lot of these elements too. People are sort of fed up. People, don't buy the politicians', usual politically correct language. And so they're looking to kind of shake it up a bit. And I think it's foolish to not pay attention. I don't think, and I think it's really important to make the distinction, that Putin is in that category. He controls, his political system is in control of a country. There's no opposition particularly allowed. There is no opposition allowed, and they're about to have elections in 2 weeks, and barely anybody really is paying attention to them because it's kind of one party, one man controlling one party, and that party will win. So I think we need to sort of pull apart some of these issues, and if we're talking about how to make democracy work, we need to listen to the people who aren't very happy with it.
All right, reactions on Facebook. Don saying this all shows how weak Clinton is as a candidate. A traditional Republican would win this in a walk. That's part of the reason why minor party candidates like Gary Johnson is polling close to 15%. That's one reaction on the hashtag F24debate. Back in June, a Pew survey found Trump to be decidedly unpopular abroad. The survey showed a slight bump for Trump in Eastern Europe and China, but there you see the parts in green are the approval ratings, highest in places. Italy, though, is in there. Italy, Poland, and Hungary. It's all very relative. Since that survey, though, we've seen, for instance, the leader of Hungary openly endorse Donald Trump. Viktor Orban saying, "I'm not Donald Trump's campaigner, but I never thought the idea would ever occur to me that he is the better of the open options for Europe and Hungary." Yasha Monk, how do you explain this?
I think that there is a lot of similarity between these different characters, including Vladimir Putin. The way to think about what I call liberal populists is that there are people who essentially think that all of the problems of politics are relatively easy to solve. But the problem at the moment is just that there's a corrupt elite that's in it for themselves and that's in cahoots with some kind of minority. And if you listen to Mr. Ganesh, that might be sort of Muslim immigrants in France. If you listen to Mr. Ackerman, that's neoliberal financiers, but it has much the same sort of role it plays in the rhetoric. And so what we need is for somebody who is an expression of a people's will, who has common sense, to come into power, be the spokesperson. I am your voice, Donald Trump said in Cleveland at the GOP convention. Be the spokesperson for ordinary people, put aside the corrupt elites, and finally be able to solve those problems, because they're actually relatively straightforward. You go in, you do the thing that everybody knows you should do, and voila, the problems are solved. And so this has two interesting elements. It is popular. It is actually based on majoritarianism. It often speaks the language of the people in a very real way, but it also ends up violating in a very serious way the rights both of ethnic and religious minorities at home and often of other countries abroad. And the problem with that is that politics is more complicated than that. That neither the kind of economic autarky favored by Mr. Ackermann or Mr. Ganesh is actually going to solve the very complicated economic problems that we face today. So one of the dangers of the liberal populists from Trump to Viktor Orban and to Vladimir Putin is that they end up treating people within the countries very unjustly, or going in for foreign policy adventurism like invading the Ukraine. But another problem is that though the popular anger about the economy, though the popular anger about the...
into that scheme, because Pena Nieto is your guy. He's your guy, and he's worse than Trump. How do you explain that?
Look, I'm not an expert on Mexican politics. He's certainly not my guy. I don't know who you guys are.
I'm talking about Mexico. This is exactly the problem. It demonstrates exactly the authoritarian underside. Let
me return to the more important point, I would just like to finish one point very quickly, and then I'll leave it open to the extremes, which is about economic policy, because I think it's true that we have to take very, very seriously the economic concerns that people have. We have to reform the economic system. It's very clear that at the moment, the social basis of the stability of our system is being undermined. But the problem is that the kind of policies that are being floated, both on the far left and the far right, are not actually going to solve those complicated problems. And we see that whether it's in Venezuela, which is in absolute economic freefall at the moment, a complete disaster, but we also see it even in a place like Poland, where you now have a far-right populist government that's going to run the biggest deficit this year of any Polish government in the last 20 years, and which is going to be disastrous for long-term economic growth. So the trick is to take the angst and the fears of ordinary people very seriously, but not necessarily to go for the simplest economic solution that they want in the short run, because that's actually not going to work. In the same way in which building a wall on the border to Mexico is not going to solve the complicated issues of identity in the United States.
Let me ask Bruno Gollnisch.
Rules is not populism.
Bruno Gollnisch, your party used to be in favor of free market policies when it was Jean-Marie Le Pen in charge. Now it's changed its tack when it comes to economics radically. Why did you do that?
Please kindly first let me answer to what I heard, because I was directly put at stake by what I heard. First of all, I do apologize for being so stupid as not being able to understand complicated matters. But I would like to say to the previous speaker that it's really surprising that so many clever people, so many intelligent people, and with nuances and things like that, first of all, had such an aggressive policy, because war against Iraq, war against, we were discussing about Ukraine, but who waged war against Serbia, for example, to dismember this country, if not NATO, supported by United States, and so on, against Libya, and so on. So I think what I heard, you admit, for example, that there are concern among the people about that economical situation, about massive immigration. But do you have the right, for example, to be against massive immigration, massive illegal immigration, and not being labeled as a racist? Do you have the right to be against competition without being told that you want to close the borders or that you are against any kind of freedom of trade? That are the problems, and that are the reasons why the establishment...
All right, on that point, Bruno Gollnisch, let me ask you. Recently, Britain had a vote on its membership of the European Union. It voted out. Yes. Now the country is scrambling to avoid recession. The leaders are waiting as long as possible before they actually begin that Brexit process. Can you realistically close the borders both to immigrants but also economically?
But not at all. There is absolutely there will be no problem for Europeans to continue to travel to Europe, nor to British people to come.
Right, but protectionism in the end will hurt the British, won't it?
Some kind of protectionism will be very good for Great Britain. They can recover some part of their lost industry. The values of the shares in the British market got down just after the referendum because of all that has been said, that you would have believed that it would be the draft, earthquakes, that floods or whatever it be, if the British people decides to get out from this mess where we still are, and nothing of this kind happened.
But can I just say, I mean, I think that in the curious thing is that both in the UK and in the US, and to some extent in France, the focus on jobs that have been lost to globalization, move to China, move to Mexico, is actually missing the larger point, which is that most of the manufacturing jobs that have been lost in all these countries have been lost to other forces, namely automation or robots or, other ways of producing. And I think that the shocking thing to me is that not even the far right, the far left, or even Hillary Clinton, if she's in the middle, is just willing to say to voters, this is the reality. These jobs are just not going to come back. And, there's a policy that should be put in place to deal with it and not always throw it onto the immigration issue or, globalization, free trade, NAFTA, TTIP.
You're perfectly right. That is not the only point. It's obvious that by increasing the burden of taxes, regulations of any kind, and so on our own economy, in the same time that we open it to completely free and unfair competition of people who have no charges, no taxes, no retirement.
I think it's just about
unfair competition.
That there are complicated problems that require complicated solutions. That doesn't mean that good politicians can't put together a message.
Let me ask Yasha Munk about this. Yasha, this is an election a campaign in the United States that nobody predicted would go this way. No one predicted that Bernie Sanders would give such a run for her money to Hillary Clinton in the primary. No one predicted that Donald Trump would eventually be the nominee. What's going to be, is this a fluke or the taste of things to come? Are politics changed for good in the US and in Europe?
It's democracy.
I think they are. When you look at the development over the last 15 or 20 years, it's very clear that you see these populist forces rising in a coherent way. And sometimes one of them falls out of favor, there's some kind of scandal, but then they're replaced. So I think what's really scary thinking about the future of the United States is that even if Donald Trump loses, you're going to get a successor movement. That's no longer the sort of strange conservatism of the Republican Party, which was always driven very much by business elites and about sort of lowering tax on very rich people, which is something that most Americans don't care about, even most conservative Americans don't care about. It's going to be this kind of ethno-nationalist appeal, trying to say that we, the real Americans, should finally prioritize our interests against those of others. And if you imagine a candidate that's rather, somebody said earlier that Hillary Clinton is not a very good candidate, and that's one of the things that was shown by the Bernie Sanders candidacy. I think that's right. In the same way, my fear is that Donald Trump is not a very good candidate, actually. And that if you have somebody who has a little bit of Donald Trump's appeal, but who's more on message, more disciplined, who manages to define the outgroup rather more narrowly, just as Marine Le Pen has done in France, who very shrewdly, I have to congratulate your party comrade there, very shrewdly has started to make steps towards gay rights, for example, has tried to overcome the Front National's deep history of anti-Semitism, because you realize that the main enemy at the moment in the French public imagination are Muslim immigrants, and that this is the main vote getter, and that you then want to demonstrate how moderate you are by being very friendly towards those other groups. If you ended up having somebody like that run in 4 years' time in the United States, I could imagine a far-right populist, a liberal nationalist, at the head of the United States, and then you see this new regime form really coming to its own internationally.
John Ackerman, here in this country, ahead of a presidential election next spring, the far left is polling in single digits, whereas the National Front is looking like it's headed to the second round. What does that tell you?
Look, what's happening to the right, both in France and the United States, is fascinating. They're transforming into this ethno-nationalism. But what's also happening is that what used to be the left has also turned into what used to be the right. So you look at Hollande and look at Obama and Clinton, and these guys have shifted totally to the right. And this has opened up an incredible possibility globally for the resurgence of the left. This is the Bernie Sanders phenomenon. This is the López Obrador phenomenon in Mexico. This is the Podemos and the Syriza and what's happening in South America. So this is really creating a big opportunity. Look at Jeremy Corbyn in England. He's embattled, but the fact that he's up there,
the critics say he's unelectable,
is a very impressive global statement. And so we have a collapse of this neoliberal supposed center, and it's coming out. It's becoming more transparent. It's not a neoliberal center. It's a right-wing ideology. You know, Hillary Clinton is most likely to win because she has the support of all the most powerful banking and industrial interests in the United States. And in democracy, so-called democracy in the United States, we all know is bought and paid for. The United States does not have an authentic democratic process. The decision is only made in a half a dozen states and by the amount of money you have in your pocket. And so we have
John Ackerman, we're going to have
a real possibility from other spots. You know, we have to break with this idea that, you know, to break down walls, there's not only, the only way to do it is not through this sort of, you know, TPP international.
Unfortunately, John, we're unable to buy more time. The clock has caught up with us. I want to thank you for joining us from Mexico City. I want to thank Bruno Gollnisch in Brussels, Yasha Monk in Boston, Celestine Bowen. Stay with us. Our Media Watch segment is next. John Ackerman is not a supporter of Mexico's president. Let's say hello to James Creedon. It seems as though his popularity has not quite soared after that visit by Mr. Trump.
Not exactly. Shall we take a quick look at some of the comment in the Mexican media? This is in El Universal, and that's dialoguing or talking with an idiot, basically, a stupid person. And that seems to be sort of the general point of view in the Mexican media. A lot of them are not pleased, a lot of the commentators and editorial writers are not pleased that the Mexican president spent 3 hours talking with Donald Trump, who had spent the previous year insulting a lot of the Mexican population. And this editorial writer even went so far as to compare Donald Trump to Hitler. So there you go. I think that's a pretty good indicator of the reading of things.
Strong feelings.
Yes. Now, regarding the wall, the proposal that Mexico pay for the wall, of course, is a completely divergent discourse there. The Mexican president saying that he absolutely refused in discussions with Donald Trump that Mexico would pay for the wall. Donald Trump saying we didn't discuss who would pay the bill. So clearly somebody's not telling the truth there. And this opinion writer, also in El Universal, Carlos Loret de Mola, saying the wall a wall or a hard wall is simply unthinkable in the 21st century. The US and Mexico essentially need each other. And sure, let's put in place a secure border, but a 21st century border. I quite liked this tweet saying that maybe if Donald Trump's strategy is to sound, well, maybe these words are a little bit excessive, evil and unstable, he could convince Mexico to pay for the wall to protect itself from this madness, right? It's one hypothesis. Anyway, in the US media, really, everybody was picking up on the double discourse or the double speech of, this sort of charm offensive, statesman-like approach in Mexico, and then in Arizona, quite a different speech playing to the base, rather, very nativist speech, as it's been described. Politico here saying, after a diplomatic turn in Mexico, a fiery immigration speech proves the GOP nominee's moderation to be a ruse. Same reading of things at Salon.com. Trump play acts as president in Mexico, then goes full nativist in Arizona. For the New York Times, in their editorial, they're saying Trump tried on his calm grown-up voice and said nice things about Mexicans and then headed back over the border, shedding his decorum by the time he got to Phoenix. They also, the editorial board of the New York Times is also finding it quite absurd and difficult to understand and confounding that empty words strung together and repeated should have propelled Trump so far. And can I give you an example of that? Empty words strung together and repeated. This was 6 a.m. this morning, US time. Mexico will pay for the wall. 100%. 6 hours later on the same Twitter account, Mexico will pay for the wall. So this sort of almost obsessive, might I say, even though it's politically incorrect to say it, like Tourette style of politics, just keep repeating the same message over and over and over like a crazy man. Well, it's actually working because people are being repeatedly exposed to a very simple message that they might agree with, and they're going to vote for it. And it might make him look crazy, but actually I would suggest that it's quite strategic.
All right, James Creedon, many thanks for that. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.